Hello, everyone. So, I am going to do a guest lecture here for you over Freud and the psychosexual stages of development. My name is Miss Bozak. I used to teach for the Health Science Academy the past 9 years, and I love this topic so much that I told Mr. Anderson that if he wanted me to do a little lecture as a supplement or just as a guest lecture, I would love to. So, I want to start out with just reminding you of the infancy of psychology. So it separated from philosophy during the 19th century. So it's only about 140 years old, which for most of you, you're like 140 years is a lot of time. But in the relative scheme of things, like history has been studied for thousands of years. And you have psych as just this really infant thing. And so psychology comes from psyche and logos, so the study of a subject, and this is the study of the mind, right? And so the reason I bring this up is because we're gonna like look at one of the big players in psych today, Sigmund Freud. So, hopefully you know who William Wundt is, right? He's the founder of psychology. If we had to name one person who's the father of it, it would be him. He did it in Leipzig, Germany, had this lab. And then you had Titchener, who was his student. And Titchener's the first one to kind of bring up structuralism, or we can throw Wundt under that too. And it's just the structure of something. What's going on in the mind? What are reaction times? It's just the what. It's not really the why or how piece. Then we go to William James, who's the father of American psychology, right? He was a student of Wundt's, but he didn't really agree with him. Came over to America and founded the first textbook, or he wrote the first textbook here and had the first kind of class for this at Harvard. And so him and who was it? G. Stanley Hall. Sorry, I'm a little rusty. G. Stanley Hall had the first lab here. William James had the first textbook that was written. So these are some important founders. Now, working along the same timelines, kind of, is going to be our guy of the day, Sigmund Freud. And so Sigmund Freud is the founder of psychodynamic theory. So hopefully you remember from the major perspectives of psychology, psychodynamics slash psychoanalysis. It's one of the big ones. If you did the little hand chart, it was the thumb because it said you're looking to your past, and then you're also looking at your unconscious mind. Freud created this whole thing. We still have people and therapists and psychologists who practice looking at the psychodynamic field. Some of them a little more Freudian than others. So this is our man of the hour, Sigmund Freud. So when I used to teach, I used to always call this freaky with Freud because his theories are different. They're out there and they are kind of jarring to a lot of people. So I always think it's best to just have some fun with it. So he is an Austrian physician, and he was really interested in looking at people who were mentally ill. That was his go-to. He wasn't necessarily ever looking at people who were psychologically, quote, healthy. He was always looking at people who were a little different or were suffering from maybe some very severe issues. Um, a lot of his theories are based on personality. He's the first one to question where does personality come from? What is it made up of? How does it develop? So that's why he's in this section. He is the founder of studying personality, which you can go to a whole field of it now. His biggest thing was that your personality and pretty much everything you do is driven by unconscious motivations. So there's things in the deep, dark recesses of your brain in this unconscious area that is pushing you towards every behavior you have. And then a lot of them have to do with unresolved childhood conflicts. So there's things that happened in your past that affect you as an adult, which I think a lot of people are like, no, my past did shape who I am, right? As a person, you aren't where you are now without having both the good and bad and maybe the mediocre of your past driving you to be that person you are today. And that's going to happen for the rest of your life. But Freud said a lot of it is conflict, constant conflict. Sorry, I have a child and he is not listening today. Constant conflict. And because we're Freud, because we have to take it up the freaky notch, a lot of these things are sexual. So we have to understand that for Freud, he kind of sees the fact that all of us are human. And so humans are nothing but animals, and animals are sexual creatures, and we are too. His perspective is a little different than maybe what you and I and people today would view. He believed we were sexual creatures from birth on, versus today we definitely are more in the persuasion of you become sexual when you go through puberty, right? Like that's the thing. But Freud, it was from birth till death. So this unconscious, this idea of an unconscious existing, it's something we're not aware of, and it's not like I can pinpoint it in your brain, like, oh, it's in your cerebellum, or it's not. It physically we can't find it. It's not a place, but it's in your mind, not your brain, but your mind. And it says that we're unaware it exists, and it really governs a lot of our behaviors. It drives us to do things. So think of a time where maybe you really felt the impulse to do something, and even though your brain is like, why am I wanting to do this? And you do it. And then you're like, oh, that was such a bad choice. Um, Freud would say maybe it was your unconscious. Maybe it was something deep down that you wanted to do. And even though you knew like socially or individually it was wrong, you were still like motivated to do it. That would be an unconscious drive that you have. And it maybe was spurned from something from childhood. So you just kind of try to try to rein it in as best you can, but sometimes we fail. Says adult personalities are shaped by these childhood experiences, and it really says we're not masters of our own destiny, and your past defines you, which is kind of off-putting to some people, right? The fact that your past is defining who you are. Because what if you had a bad past? You don't want that defining you. And it also, because we're Freud, emphasizes the importance of sexual urges throughout your entire life. And this is coming from a man working in the very early 1900s, where it's like the Victorian age. People aren't talking about sex. And I mean, women are covered from neck to ankles and wrists. Um, People aren't having these conversations. And here he is laying it all out, which made him kind of appealing almost at the time. At least interesting, right? Even today in 2020, it's interesting. So the psyche goes into the id, ego, and superego. And for the id, you have this thing that's present at birth. It's the first part of our psyche, our id, ego, and superego. It is the first one that supposedly develops. So I felt like I skipped a slide, but I guess not. The id is totally living in the unconscious mind. And it motivates us in sexual and aggressive urges. That's what the id wants. It's kind of like this little monster that lives in our head that says, mind my mind, I want it now, 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 and I don't care what stands in my way. The only thing that I want is immediate gratification. And if it feels good, that pleasure principle, if it feels good, I want it. It doesn't matter. If I feel good, I want it now. The only thing that it won't cross lines for is if physical pain is going to be met. If it's something that, if I do this, I'll like die or I'll get punched in the face. Those might be things that keep you at bay, but everything else, no. So I always tell kids it's like this caveman that lives in your head that's very barbaric. And the idea that, it's kind of crass and, you see somebody that's attractive when you're walking down the street and you're like, ooh, I like. Your id would say, grab them. Grab them by the hair, clunk them over the head, and drag them back to your cave and do what you will. Society, we're like, that's illegal. You can't do that stuff. But that doesn't mean your id's still not telling you want to do that. You just figure out ways around it. But your id, if it could do what it wanted, it's going to go take what it wants now. If I'm in class and I see a kid with a new iPhone and I'm like, my phone's old and gross, I'm just going to take their phone. My id would say, like, do it now, grab it, take it, right? There's no impulse control really for it. The superego starts developing as we age and as we start learning rules of society. It's these internalized ideals and standards. It's your superhero. The superego is your superhero, or the conscience on your shoulder. So that little voice, when you go to do something real dumb and that little voice says, I don't think we should. This could be a bad idea. This is the thing telling you, don't do it, don't do it. So pretend you have an angel and a devil on your shoulder. The devil is the id going, do it, now, now, now. This is going to be great. Your superhero is like, chill, you're not supposed to be doing this stuff. This is not okay. They typically sometimes want opposite things. The id wants it now, doesn't care. It's fun. It feels great. Do it. The super is like, we don't need to do any of this. I don't care if you want it. We don't need to do it, or we don't need that thing. This develops based on what our parents, peers, and society teaches us. And it wants perfection and whatever that might look like. Then you have your ego stuck in the middle. It's you listening to the angel and the devil, and you're trying to get the id what it wants, but also follow some of the rules that the superego is laying out, because those are important too. This works on the reality principle. So how can I get the id what it wants without being crazy, without making really bad choices? So I see someone who's attractive and I'm super into them and I totally want them. I can't go caveman on them. That's not okay. because there's rules, and my ego knows that. My superego is like, you don't need them. Walk away. Leave them alone. Don't even try. My ego is like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get the id or attempt to get the id what it wants, but I can do it in a realistic way. I can go up to that person and talk to them and flirt with them, and then I can get their number, and then maybe we can date for a while, and then maybe we'll see where things go, right? And so I can try to get the id what it wants. Just it's going to be a longer amount of time. It's not going to be that, immediate gratification, but I can get there in a realistic way. So this is the representation I always like of it. The angel and the devil on the shoulders. So this is where the preconscious, conscious, and unconscious mind come in. The preconscious or the conscious mind is whatever's in your mind right now. What are you thinking about? I don't care. Are you thinking about how boring this is? Maybe you are. That's okay. Maybe you're thinking about what you're going to do after school. Maybe you're thinking about all the homework you have. I don't know. Who knows what you're thinking about? That's in your conscious mind. Right now, I'm thinking about the iceberg theory, right? That's in my conscious mind. Now, my preconscious, that is something that I'm not currently thinking about, but I could be. So if I was like, hey, what'd you eat for breakfast? Or, hey, what's your address? All those things have the ability to be raised to the surface so you can think about them. The unconscious mind is the bottom. So they call it the iceberg theory because if you know anything about an iceberg, like only 10% is above the water that we see, like your mind, and 90% is under the surface. You can see a little bit of it that's like that preconscious, but then a lot of it is going to be the unconscious at the bottom, this giant piece that we don't even know about, but it's there. And this is why we have like Freudian slips. And so with Freudian slips, it's this idea that your unconscious sometimes pokes its little head out and makes you say like ridiculous things. So it's this glimpse that just happens briefly. You say something. So maybe you're really like tight on cash and you get a bill in front, or you go to the doctor and the doctor wants to give you this medication and you know it's going to cost a small fortune. So you accidentally slip and say, please don't give me any bills because I can't swallow them. Oh, pills. I mean pills, not bills. That's because in the back of your mind, in your unconscious, you were stressed about money, but it wasn't at the forefront of your head. You meant to say, please don't make it a big pill. I have trouble swallowing those, but you said bills instead, right? And of course, since it's Freud, a lot of them would be like inappropriate slips that are made. So don't tell anyone. But one time, Miss Morrison was teaching about the reproductive center, and Mr. Spear came in, and she accidentally was like, "Oh, hey, Mr. Sperm. I mean Spear." Right? It was like a harmless slip, but Freud would be like, "Oh, it's a Freudian slip. Look at the content of it too. Ha ha ha." All right. So that's where I'm going to stop this one. I don't even know if it's going to be used, but I'll put it out there anyway. Next, you'll see me when we talk about the psychosexual stages, which is a whole load of awkward and fun.